So, the third Sonic movie released just over 7 months ago? Holy crap. Anyways, I already released my unscripted review, but I do want to make individual analysis videos on the characters in the movies. Now, I've already spoken about Knuckles and Tails, and don't worry, I'll get to Sonic and Shadow real soon, but one character that I've really been wanting to talk about is good old Dr. Robotnik. Now, I've spoken about the character of Robotnik from the games at length, especially in the dedicated character analysis video, which you should all go and watch by the way, but to sum it up, I love the way that he was written, especially in the classic titles, the adventure games, and hell, I've even warmed up to his appearances in Unleashed, some excess goofiness aside. He was not only a threatening villain, but he had his own unique quirks that made him stand out from the generic villain lineup. Whether it was his design, his genius, his ego, the edges of silliness that surrounded the character, it all served to create one of the most memorable villains ever. But, as the story all too commonly goes, the 2010s came by and completely dropped the ball. He was no longer this brilliant evil genius, but became a laughingstock, all to serve the franchise's new direction, and many, including myself, despised it. One of the most important things for a villain is credibility, and he was now a character that nobody could take seriously. And that's an issue for the primary villain of the franchise. And it definitely doesn't help that the jokes fucking sucked. By the end of the decade, the games certainly weren't delivering a well-written version of the character, but there was one major wildcard. The upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog movie. Oh god, get that thing off my screen. It was a chance, finally, to see a fresh take on Robotnik that hopefully was well written and respected the legacy of the character. And thankfully, the films didn't disappoint. They gave us one of the most memorable interpretations of Robotnik in years, and even dared to have him undergo a satisfying character arc? Oh dear god, someone get Neil Druckmann on the line. He needs to hear about such a revelation. There was genuine growth here. Not only for his growing insanity, but even by the end, a bit of humanity. But as always, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's take it from the top and analyze his appearances in each film and how they portray the character of Robotnik. Also, this video contains spoilers. You've been warned.
Of course I want a latte. I love the way you make them!
So, for anyone who needs a quick refresher on the first film, Sonic was forced to flee his original home in Green Hills after being attacked by a tribe of echidnas, leaving behind Longclaw and everything he knew. While he did find some comfort living on Earth, he was still incredibly lonely, constantly having to hide and never really being able to connect with anybody. This all leads to a somewhat funny, yet depressing scene of Sonic playing an entire game of baseball by himself. And when he hits the winning run, there's nobody for him to celebrate with. It's then that overwhelming loneliness bubbles over and his emotions get the better of him, causing him to run so fast that he unleashes a massive electrical shockwave across the galaxy. This, of course, catches the attention of the US government, who decide to bring in one man to deal with Sonic. Dr. Robotnik.
And here we go.
Now, I'll be honest, I was very skeptical when I first heard that Jim Carrey was cast as Dr. Robotnik. Don't get me wrong, I love the guy, he's easily one of my favorite actors, but Robotnik. That had me doing a full-on Scooby-Doo gulp. It felt like one of those Hollywood moves where they slap a big name on the poster just to sell tickets, like, this. But I ended up being pleasantly surprised at his unique yet faithful take on the character. And that, to me, is exactly how an adaptation should be. Something that honors the source material, whilst bringing in its own twist to help it stand out on its own. From the get-go, Robotnik's introduction is glorious. One of his most defining traits is his narcissism, his ego. Just look at how he enters this scene in this overly performative way, backed up by an entire entourage. This isn't a man that works in secret from the shadows. He makes his presence known, which is exactly like the games. He then immediately takes over the scene, making it clear who's in charge and completely belittles the Major, saying that nobody cares who he is.
In a sequentially ranked hierarchy based on level of critical importance, the disparity between us is too vast to quantify. Agent Stone?
The doctor thinks you're basic.
It's that sense of superiority that lends really well to the character. The way he undermines everyone around him, including his own assistant in the form of Agent Stone. He'd always order him around, make fun of him, shout at him for literally no reason, although that did lead to the legendary steamed Austrian goat milk sequence, and hell, at one point, he just straight up punches him. Yeah, no, really. The dynamic between Stone and Robotnik is something that is truly interesting, to say the least. Agent Stone is someone who simply reveres Robotnik and his work, and so becomes this lackey that emphasizes the authoritarian nature of Robotnik. Robotnik pretty much just uses this man as an ego boost, and also a part-time barista. There is a lot more to talk about when it comes to these two, but I'll talk about that later. But something that's really interesting isn't just how this movie shows off Robotnik's ego, but how it also highlights how fragile that ego actually is. As confident and dominant as he acts, anytime that he's not in control, you see the cracks start to form. Just look at the rooftop scene with Tom and Maddie. The moment they mock him, you can practically see him seething from the sheer disrespect. Robotnik might act like some sort of mechanical god, but in true hypocritical fashion, he can't handle being undermined himself. And if there's one thing he's never been prepared for, it's losing. And we'll circle back to that point later, so keep it in the back of your minds. Getting back to the main story though, Robotnik does eventually track down Sonic to Tom's house, where we get some delightfully funny interactions between these two. Seriously, this scene is so underrated. But this leads me on to my next point, the comedy. Now, one of the main things that I was initially worried about was the humor. Was this Robotnik gonna go down the same route as the Meta-era games and just be a complete joke with no credibility and no ability to pose a threat? Where he becomes such a comedic punching bag that the audience can't even take his evil actions seriously? Well, luckily, the answer is no. For the most part. This is a Robotnik that managed to be funny, whilst also posing a threat to the main characters. The best incarnations of Robotnik are the ones that strike that balance between the seriousness and the silliness. Look no further than Adventure 2, which is what I believe to be the best written Robotnik. He's a villain to be taken seriously, but he does have that slight humorous edge around his character that never overstayed its welcome. And while this movie does have a much bigger focus on the comedic side than something like Adventure 2, it still works fairly well, especially thanks to the sheer charisma of Jim Carrey and the actually competent writing. Despite all the jokes and exaggerated behavior, Robotnik genuinely posed a threat to the main characters. This wasn't just some eccentric bumbling goofball, his actions had weight. I mean, he blasted Sonic into unconsciousness, hunted him across the country, and at one point literally launched a full-grown man out of the bar window like it was nothing, showing zero hesitation or remorse. I mean, there's moments where Robotnik is actually throwing punches, and it's almost reminiscent of the comics. Even the little things like him telling Tom to keep the body fresh after he thought he killed Sonic just help to emphasize that evil nature of the character. Beneath all the theatrics, there's a cold, calculated danger to him. He has zero regard for any human life whatsoever. Everyone is merely a puppet in his play that he controls. It's almost like the humor of the character serves as a way of juxtaposing his evil, putting you at ease and serving as a way of distracting you of the evil that he's actually capable of. And assisting this idea of him actually being a threat is his intelligence. This is a man with an IQ of 300, and I'm glad the movies don't shy away from showing this. It's mostly displayed through his technology or his ingenuity, like with how he utilizes Sonic's quill to build a jet that can match his speed, or even all of his creations, like his egg drones. And speaking of robots, that's another interesting feature that's exacerbated with this interpretation of Robotnik, his love of robots. He believes them to be better than humans in every way, and there are several points across the movies where he even outright pretends to act like a robot. But why does he love them so much? Well, we learn during this interaction with Tom that he's actually an orphan, and so he probably feels like the world and its people chose to abandon him. But the robots that he builds, they have no free will. They do as they're told, and so they never let him down the way he feels that humanity has. This is a fantastic explanation for his love of robots and something that would be explored in far greater depth in the third movie. In fact, there's this great behind the scenes clip with Jim Carrey that I've shown before, but I think it expertly captures Robotnik's headspace when it comes to all this.
He hates society because he wasn't nurtured, he wasn't loved, and this is what happens to a genius like that when they have no nurturing, no love, no guidance, and that's what he's become, the epitome of that. He hates the world because the world abandoned him. And I see him as somebody who wants to be the warden of a mechanized prison that captures the consciousness of the world.
The story then leads to Robotnik hunting Sonic down, eventually resulting in a climactic showdown between the two, ultimately leading to Robotnik's defeat, where he's sent to the Mushroom Planet. And it's here where we really get to see his character evolve, especially thanks to the post-credits scene teasing us with what's to come. But yeah, that's Robotnik in the first film, and in my opinion, it's a fantastic interpretation of the character. He carries the core traits well, but, like I said, has his own charm and differences to really stand out from other takes of the character. Oh, but it only gets crazier from here.
I knew you'd come back, sir. You never stopped steaming your Austrian goat's milk.
Immediately, Sonic 2 gets off to a great start. We see Robotnik on this mushroom planet looking extraordinarily disheveled, now with his iconic bald head and bushy mustache.
Yeah, the mustache is an extension of his ego, you know? And I wanted it even bigger. I was arguing, go bigger, go even bigger than that.
God, I love this man. He's built this insane Rube Goldberg mushroom latte machine, complete with a little Sonic getting squashed. Not only that, but Robotnik is talking to a stone, called Agent Stone. Yeah, safe to say that his isolation on this planet has caused him to become, what's the phrase? Oh yeah, absolutely batshit insane. But that isn't the only cause of his growing insanity, it's also his obsession, particularly his obsession with Sonic. In the first movie, he started off as this government agent, where finding and neutralizing Sonic was simply just another job to him. But as Sonic continuously eluded him and overcame Robotnik throughout the movie, that job becomes an obsession. He now has to catch Sonic to prove his superiority. Remember back when I mentioned that Robotnik hates the idea of losing? Well, I wasn't kidding. Robotnik doesn't see his defeat at the hands of Sonic as a loss, but rather a minor setback that he will correct. Again, it's that ego, that hubris. This leads to Robotnik utilizing a bunch of scrap metal alongside Sonic's quill to create a giant beacon that emanates across space. This, plus the Rube Goldberg machine, once again highlight that intellect of Robotnik. And further emphasizing this is the fact that he was able to put it all together whilst being stranded on an unknown planet for about 8 months. Hell, the fact that he survived is a goddamn feat in of itself. Anyways, the beacon leads to some odd alien creatures showing up that Robotnik promptly deals with using a bunch of traps that he laid, again showing that ingenuity. But before he can make his escape, Knuckles shows up, and immediately Robotnik starts to take advantage of Knuckles and uses him to get his revenge on Sonic. Then, as expected, their first stop is straight to Sonic's front door. Not recuperating, maybe taking a day off to prepare, nothing. Straight there because of his obsession to beat Sonic. Robotnik could have just sent Knuckles in to take Sonic by surprise, but of course he has to make an entrance and make his presence known to his enemies. This is where he calls on Knuckles to fight with Sonic, and as they do, Knuckles reveals that he's here to reclaim the Master Emerald, and immediately you can see the gears in Robotnik's head starting to turn. Now he has a new goal, to get the Emerald and use its power to take revenge on all those that have wronged him. And he does this by forming a somewhat friendly alliance with our very own hot-headed Echidna. Oh, and he also jumps in the car and starts licking the windscreen? Yeah, remember when I said Robotnik had become more insane? Well, following in that suit is his comedy, which feels more unhinged and in some cases way over the top. Personally, I prefer the more controlled humor of the first film compared to this more outlandish humor, but it can still be seriously funny. The only thing that I can never forgive though is that Robotnik flossed. That's despicable. But the great thing about this humor is that it works with the character. Because there's an explanation for it, and it functions as a tool to see how his isolation on the Mushroom Planet, alongside his obsession for Sonic, has truly affected him. The nature of his comedy is shifting as the character changes. It's not like the 2010s where the comedy is turned up to 11 with no reason or explanation whatsoever. But yeah, Robotnik and Knuckles team up in a race against Sonic and Tails for the Master Emerald, ultimately leading to them discovering this island resembling Labyrinth Zone that contained the Emerald. And as Sonic and Knuckles are distracted fighting each other, Robotnik swoops in and steals the Emerald for himself, not before monologuing to Knuckles. He tells him that it was naive for him to think that they were actually friends and berates him for being so idiotic. Again, he has to feel superior to those around him. All he had to do was take the Emerald, but he has to rub it all in for Knuckles. Knuckles believed that they were genuinely friends, but of course, to Robotnik, anything that isn't a subservient robot is simply a means to an end for him. Hell, we get to see this earlier with Agent Stone, who was the one who kept all of Robotnik's stuff at the ready, believing that he would return. He provided them with a base of operations in the form of the Mean Bean Cafe, nice touch, and even made him a latte with steamed Austrian goat milk. Stone would do anything for Robotnik and is obsessed with him. And in some cases, maybe a bit too obsessed. But Robotnik doesn't give two shits about him. For example, when he and Knuckles were heading off to Siberia, Knuckles asks if they were going to take Stone with them, but Robotnik insists that they leave him behind. Knuckles even tells him that this action is dishonorable, but Robotnik doesn't care. This is how he rolls. Stone is just another worthless puppet to him, someone to take advantage of, much like he did with Knuckles. And now, with the power of the Emerald, Robotnik heads back to Green Hills where he's confronted by the military, and his response to their threats is to use the Emerald's power to build his greatest robot yet. I haven't actually taken the time to discuss it yet, but I do want to talk about the designs of his robots. I don't like them all that much. They look very plain and generic, which doesn't scream Robotnik at all. Like I said, this man is a narcissist, and in almost every interpretation of the character, his robots echo this. I mean, just look at the robot designs from Sonic Heroes and then compare them to the movies. I wouldn't have cared too much if the designs had evolved as the movies went on, but aside from adding some buzz bombers and the giant crab, there really is no evolution, which I thought was a huge missed opportunity. But where there was no missed opportunity was with this bad boy. Oh yeah, the Death Egg robot. The literal manifestation of Robotnik's ego. You see, the Emerald turns your thoughts into reality, and so it makes sense that his thoughts would be of a giant robot of destruction with that signature Robotnik look. I mean, this design is literally the collusion of Robotnik's characteristics. His genius, his love of robots, his destructive personality, his evil, it all comes together with this. This screams Robotnik, as well as just being a great reference to Sonic 2. And just look at the glee on Robotnik's face as he gets to use this machine to murder and maim people. He's still evil at his core and poses a legitimate threat to the heroes where Sonic does very nearly die. Seriously, zero remorse for human life. Of course, as expected, Robotnik does end up losing thanks to the godlike power of Supersonic, and it's here where Robotnik dies. Supposedly. Yeah, it was after this movie that we got Jim Carrey announcing his retirement from acting, something that a lot of us were disheartened by. Not only because a lot of us just love Jim Carrey and his acting, but also it felt like there was more to be done with Robotnik's story. I wanted it to have a satisfying arc, an ending where we could happily say goodbye to this incarnation of the character. But it looked like this was it. That is, until Jim Carrey stated that he was open to returning to the role, provided the writers brought him a script written in gold ink. And oh boy, did they deliver.
I'll miss your lattes with steamed Austrian goat milk. I love the way you make them.
Sonic 3 kicks off with the release of Shadow by what appears to be Robotnik. He kicks the crap out of a bunch of gun soldiers and then escapes, making his way to Tokyo. Team Sonic are recruited by Gun to go and neutralize the threat of Shadow, but ultimately end up failing. After which they head to the Chow Garden, nice touch, where they meet with Olive Garden guy who explains the story of Shadow. But surprisingly, they're attacked by a bunch of egg drones, something that shouldn't be possible given that Robotnik's, supposed to be dead. Then a stranger in all black enters on a motorcycle and takes out the drones before escaping, with Team Sonic very quickly following him to a dock, where it's revealed that the stranger is none other than
The goat milker!
And when Team Sonic accuse him of releasing Shadow, he says the last thing that they want is another superpowered hedgehog running about. He then summons a giant mechanical crab and invites the guys inside, to where we get the big reveal of Robotnik, looking very... well, let's just say he's had a bad day or two. Remember back when I said that Robotnik hates to lose? Well, that's true, and one reason for that, aside from his ego, is that Robotnik doesn't know how to deal with loss. He's seemingly never lost in his life, and even saw his defeat in the first film as a minor setback, as I previously mentioned. But the ending of Sonic 2? That was different. That wasn't just a setback, it was a crushing defeat. I mean, if a giant Master Emerald-powered Death Egg robot wasn't enough to stop Sonic, then what is? And it's this defeat that sends him spiraling. He's lost all motivation to do pretty much anything that isn't sitting around, eating junk food, and watching Spanish soap operas. You can even see all of the rubbish surrounding him, showing that he doesn't even clean up after himself, whereas all of his previous bases were squeaky clean. And then there's the changes in his design, where he's gained a lot of weight, his hair is completely unkempt, and god, I didn't know it was possible for a mustache to look depressed. Everything about him, from his appearance to his surroundings, reflects a complete loss of control. It's not just that he lost a fight, it's that for the first time, he's lost his sense of superiority. That hubris that he's carried from the moment that we first met him. And without that, Robotnik doesn't know who he is. But what comes next is some genuinely great writing. Stone informs Robotnik that there's someone out there that's impersonating him and using his egg drones. And this really sets Robotnik off. He didn't really give much of a crap about seeing Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles other than a quick remark about them being his enemies. But the moment he finds out someone's out there stealing his image, using his name, his tech, his brand, that's when he snaps. Because for Robotnik, it's not just about revenge, it's about control. It's that ego. And the idea that someone else is out there pretending to be him, diluting the legend of Robotnik, the one thing he has left, is more offensive than anything Sonic could ever do. This is such a brilliant way of bringing Robotnik back into the story without it feeling forced or out of character. By preying on his narcissism. He immediately jumps to work, tracking down their next location, and even cleans himself up, bringing back his iconic look. And I think that this is the perfect moment to dive into Robotnik's design across all three movies, because it does a brilliant job of visually telling his story. In the first film, we're introduced to a more professional Robotnik. Slicked back hair, clean black clothing, and neatly groomed facial hair. He gives off a more refined vibe. He's just there to do his job as a government agent. But as his obsession with Sonic grows throughout the film as he fails to catch him, we eventually see him donning a red flight suit, nicely contrasting the blue of Sonic. And this red color for his character would remain for the rest of the movie, cementing their opposition. But then came the Mushroom Planet, where we see his design evolve alongside his growing insanity. Sporting the classic Robotnik bold look, goggles, and of course, the big scraggly mustache. The obsession with Sonic only intensifies, and even after gaining the immense power of the Master Emerald, he's still defeated. And that's what takes us to here, where we see his broken down look. And even beyond this, Robotnik does end up getting a new suit, which is actually reminiscent of the design from Sonic 06. His visual transformation across the movies not only reflects his character growth, but it also works on a meta level. Each change actually brings him closer to looking more like his video game counterpart. The writers could have easily started with the iconic design from the very beginning, but they didn't. Instead, they chose to earn it by using it as a goal of their long-term storytelling. And it definitely paid off. Getting back to the story though, Team Sonic ends up teaming up with Robotnik and Stone, where they head to an old gun base. And as they explore, Robotnik eventually runs into a familiar face. His grandfather, Gerald Robotnik. And it's from here where Robotnik's character arc for this film truly takes off. So we know that Robotnik grew up as an orphan, something that shaped his deep resentment of humanity. And with no real human connections, robots became his primary attachment. I mean, just look at how he treats his robots in this scene alone.
You stole my babies!
They know who their real daddy is.
But after encountering his grandfather, something inside him shifts. For the first time, there's a desire to form a genuine bond, a human connection. And in Robotnik's mind, Gerald is the only one worthy of that connection solely because of their bloodline. Gerald then explains his absence, but also his plan. You see, Gerald developed a weapon called the Eclipse Cannon during his imprisonment that he says can be used to take revenge on Gunn, as it can deliver a precision strike to destroy a specific area. But in order to use this weapon, 2 keycards are needed, and one of them just so happens to be at the Gunn headquarters in London. This obviously results in Robotnik, Stone, Gerald, and Shadow teaming up, leaving Team Sonic behind. And we end up getting this bonding scene between the two Robotniks where they get to do all sorts of hilarious things, like riding a bike, riding a roller coaster, and of course, physical assault. But throughout this sequence, we see one commonality, the dejection of Agent Stone. He's continuously thrown to the side and, man, you can't help but feel bad for him. He really does care for Robotnik and wants his approval, but throughout all of these movies, never gets it. I mean, Robotnik earlier said that he needed room for his outfit because of the weight that he'd put on, and forced Stone to give up the shirt on his back. And for the keen-eyed of you out there, you can actually see that for the next bit of the movie, Stone is just wearing a blazer and a tie. No shirt. It's a small detail, but it perfectly sums up their dynamic. Stone gives everything, and Robotnik gives nothing. Now though, in London, Robotnik and Gerald infiltrate the base, whilst of course leaving Stone behind, and during this sequence we get the legendary dance scene. Now, in my discussion of the movie, I originally thought that the dance scene was funny and well choreographed, but I thought it was stupid that two super geniuses would waste time dancing instead of gunning straight for the keycard. But a few of you in the comments actually made a really great point about this scene that made me rethink that criticism. You argued that the dancing wasn't pointless, but actually intentional, and tied directly to the characters' egos. They're not dancing because they're being foolish and idiotic, they're dancing because they can. They genuinely believe they're so far ahead of everyone else that they can afford to mess around and still come out on top. And honestly, that's quintessential Robotnik. Plus, we already know that Robotnik has a soft spot for dancing as we saw back in the first movie, so it tracks with his character. So yeah, credit where credit's due, good job comment section. See, I do read your comments. There is eventually a confrontation between Team Sonic, the Robotniks, and Gun, but the Robotniks end up on top thanks to Shadow retrieving the stolen keycard from Tom. Gerald then uses this to launch the Eclipse Cannon, taking us into the final act of this film, and the climax of Robotnik's character arc. Whilst aboard the cannon, Shadow begins to power it up as both Robotniks look over the Earth, and it's here where we get Gerald revealing his true plan. To use the Eclipse Cannon to destroy the entire planet and kill everyone, including themselves. Robotnik is understandably confused, saying that they can't annihilate the Earth, that working together, they can rule it. But Gerald simply tells him that humanity is a failed experiment, that if anybody should know that, it's Robotnik. How all his life he's been alone, rejected by society, how nobody cares for him. And when Robotnik tells Gerald that they have each other now, that they're a family, Gerald simply replies with the coldest line in the film.
Oh, Ivo. You're no Maria.
God, just looking at Robotnik's face here, he looks heartbroken. He thought for the first time in his life he finally had a true connection. Someone who he cared about and who in turn cared about him. But it was all a facade. Everything Gerald did, from complimenting his genius to spending time with him to telling him how proud he is of him, everything was all done to manipulate Robotnik, to take advantage of the weaknesses that Gerald knew he had. At no point throughout this entire movie did Gerald actually care for his grandson, making all of those scenes from earlier feel a whole lot more sinister. But hey, I guess manipulation just runs through the family. And what's funny about this is that Stone already tried to warn Robotnik about Gerald, but Robotnik just simply brushed Stone off, stuck in the infatuation of his grandfather, saying that Stone was just jealous and then proceeded to fire him. Poor Stone, man. Again, he cares for Robotnik so much, but as always, he's dismissed. With the interruption of Supersonic though, Robotnik uses this time to distract his grandfather, punching him in the same way that he punched Stone in the first movie, and it leads to their final confrontation. I will say that as funny as this fight is, this is one of those instances where I do feel like the silliness was a bit too prevalent here. And it does take away from the climactic feeling of the situation. You know, making jokes, references to things like autocorrect and Green Lantern. I do wish that this fight was taken a lot more seriously to match the intensity of the finale, because it does just feel like there was a little too much focus on the comedy here. Though Gerald did have the upper hand and did seemingly win, Knuckles and Tails come to the rescue and Robotnik uses Sonic's quill to actually kill his grandfather. Holy shit. He then proceeds to assist Tails in redirecting the beam of the cannon, leading to the moon being blown up, but that wasn't enough. The cannon's reactor core begins to overload, and as Robotnik explains to Shadow, if it does explode, it means the Earth will become irradiated, rendering it uninhabitable. Shadow then tells him to stay aboard the Ark and stabilize the core long enough to allow him to push the cannon away from the Earth, saying that it's their last chance to do the right thing. And surprisingly, Robotnik agrees, wishing Shadow good luck, in his own way, and then proceeds to stabilize the core, but not without doing one last thing, He uses a small camera drone to start a live stream back down to Earth, and dedicates it to one very special henchman, that being Agent Stone. He tells him that he was the only person who ever cared about him, calling him a sicker friend, telling him that he'll miss his lattes with steamed Austrian goat milk, that he loves the way he makes them. Agent Stone gets a full view of this and, man, Lee kills it here. You can see the pain and sadness on his face, yet the joy of his acceptance. After all these years of loyalty and sacrifice, Stone is finally recognized, not just as a henchman, but as a friend. Earlier in the film, there was a moment between Stone and Tails, where Tails talks about what makes Team Sonic special, that they're all real friends. Like you and Robotnik, right? But Stone hesitated, shakily replying, yeah, best friends. But even then, you can tell that he doesn't believe it. He wants to, but he has no idea how Robotnik truly sees him. But, in the end, he finally got his answer. Robotnik ends his livestream by pretending to be a robot, a great callback to the previous films, and then signs off by saying it's been a real drag, thanks for nothing. And, just like that, the Eclipse cannon explodes, taking Robotnik with it. What a fantastic way to cap off his character arc. This final speech gave Robotnik the one thing that he had yet to display throughout any of the movies: humanity. Yes, he's technically a human, yet he was also somehow the most inhumane character. One who gave zero shits about human life. One who uses and manipulates those around him for his own personal gain. One who would pretend to be a robot as he genuinely believed robots to be superior. Yet here, he chose to save the world. He chose to tell Agent Stone the truth. In his final moments, he chose to do the right thing. This ending was actually quite reminiscent of the ending of Adventure 2, where you had Robotnik reflecting on his grandfather's actions and if he really meant to destroy the Earth. It was a rare moment of humanity for him, just as it is here. And this is how you pull off a satisfying conclusion to a character arc. Take notes, Neil Druckmann. Take notes. Overall, I really do love this rendition of Robotnik. Yes, it can be a bit over the top at times with a little bit too much focus on comedy. I mean, Robotnik kissing Gerald's feet or licking the windscreen was a bit much. But again, this is a non-canon and different interpretation, so I can look over the changes from the game counterpart as long as it works and is consistent with the movie's characterization. Which it was. And like I already mentioned, he managed to be an actual threat, which is the hallmark of a good villain. Less so in the third film, but that movie was exploring a whole different side of Robotnik's character. And whilst we're talking about it, it was cathartic to see the growth of this character. Starting off as this genius government employee that is extremely selfish with one hell of an ego, transforming into a much crazier version of himself, not before finally becoming someone willing to sacrifice his own life for the sake of the world. It's funny, it's threatening, it's serious, it's tragic, and it's even surprisingly heartwarming. And again, I didn't think Jim Carrey had it in him, but his performance is the beating heart of the character. I actually can't think of many others who could pull off this version of the character. There's also been a lot of talk about Jim Carrey potentially returning for future Sonic movies, and whilst that does sound great, I actually kind of don't want to see his return. I know, but hear me out. His character arc, his journey, his story, it's complete. And I feel like bringing him back could undermine that. Plus, it would allow future movies to focus on other villains. Perhaps characters like Mephiles or even Chaos. But at this point, the movie writers have earned my trust, and I'm sure that whatever they choose to do, it'll be entertaining and well written. But, as always, only time will tell. Well, thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, then why not leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep up with all future content. If you want to go above and beyond in supporting the channel, then feel free to check out my Patreon. The links are in the description, as always. And speaking of which, I want to give a massive shout out to all of my patrons. You guys are legends. But, with all that said, I'll see you guys next time.